So many of you know that I absolutely love Peperomia, and this is no exception. This is Peperomia dahlstedii, which is also known as vining pepper. And you could see that this would make an incredible hanging basket plant because it's just teeming over the edges here, and it has these beautiful semi-succulent leaves. This is actually more of an epiphytic plant that is native to Brazil. So you can imagine this, hanging off of some wood or trees and just hanging over the edge of those limbs. And I don't have this in a hanging basket, but I have this growing under plants underneath a grow light. So it is not actually in any kind of window light. And that's one of the great things about Peperomia, is that it doesn't need a tremendous amount of light, and in some cases doesn't need a tremendous amount of space, because they are quite diminutive plants, even though this one's quite lush. So I've had this plant for maybe about 3.5 years now, and I liked it so much that I ended up getting a second one. And they're both growing under that kind of grow light condition. So I'm saying like a little bit more like low light to medium light condition, and that's totally fine for this plant. As far as soil goes, because it's more epiphytic, which just means that it's growing on something else, it doesn't have a very extensive root system and will actually have root rot if you overwater it. So I have a very well draining mix, so something with a lot of perlite. You could actually even use kind of like more woody bark material, which would be more customary to what this plant actually faces in the wild. And that just means that when you water it, the water will kind of go through at a much more quicker rate, which is what you want for a plant like this, because when it has this kind of semi-succulent nature, it means that the stems and the leaves are actually holding on to the water a little bit better. So you don't need to overwater this particular plant. So if you are a little bit more of a low maintenance waterer yourself, then these are the types of plants that would actually do well for you. As far as humidity goes, this does come from a more humid climate, but with many of our tropical and subtropical species that we bring indoors, you don't need that high humidity. So going with even just a more moderate, middle of the road route as far as humidity goes will be perfectly fine for this plant. And because it has this kind of succulent leaf and a little bit more protection as the part of the cuticle, which is the top layer of the epidermis, then you're going to be totally fine with this particular plant. Fertilizing is pretty easy. I look at this in the spring, summer, and fall, and that's when I actually do most fertilizing, and I'll do a 10-10-10 on a bi-weekly basis. You could probably even get away with doing it on a monthly basis, but something well balanced. You could go synthetic, just cut it in half, or you could go with an organic, gentler fertilizer, and you might just want to fertilize it a little bit more regularly. Propagation is relatively easy. I actually haven't propagated these by leaf cuttings, but I actually think that that's totally feasible for this plant. As with most Peperomia, you could do leaf cuttings. However, I have actually propagated Peperomia tetragona, which is very similar to this. And I think when you take a stem cutting, it'll actually probably propagate a lot quicker. So I would take maybe a stem cutting behind the second or the third node and have a tip cutting in there and try to propagate this in like a moist sphagnum. As far as plant pests go, this has had no problems for me. Peperomia have been really resilient in my opinion, and I haven't had any kind of pest pressures. So if you're looking for a great plant that's small, diminutive, but also would be a really nice hanging basket option in kind of low to moderate light conditions, then I would take a look at Peperomia dahlstedii.